Hello friends and welcome back to the Brockopp side. Terminator 2 Judgment Day was once again directed by James Cameron, and this takes place about 7 years after the events of Terminator 1, but this time around John Connor, played by Edward Furlong, is now a young lad in foster care while Sarah Connor's off in the cuckoo hut because, she kind of prophesized that the world is going to end and nobody's taking her seriously, but this time Skynet sends back a Terminator to kill John Connor since he's now the main target, and then the Resistance sends back another Terminator to protect John Connor, and what we get is probably one of, if not the greatest action movie of all time. So, we have a couple weeks until Terminator Dark Fate, and, I'm a little behind on these Terminator reviews. I was planning to do one every week, but then time got away from me, so gotta play a serious game of catch-up here. But anyway, before we get into the video itself, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We're nearly to 200, and we got some cool things planned if we do hit that mark. But anyway, so, Terminator 2, let's get into it. But first, a little backstory. So the idea of making a sequel to the first Terminator started almost immediately after the first movie was completed, but one of the big things that was holding director James Cameron back from going forward with another Terminator movie was he didn't quite feel that the visual effects in CGI were quite there to pull off the effects he needed for the liquid metal T-1000, so Terminator 2 kinda got shoved to the side a bit, and then he went on to make The Abyss, which was a prime example of an early use of CGI with this cool water tentacle thing, so that kind of proved that CGI was basically there to pull off the effects he needed. But also one of the big things holding back a Terminator sequel were legal troubles. The Hemdahl Film Corporation owned 50% of the Terminator film rights, which led to some serious disputes, but then Arnold Schwarzenegger himself managed to urge Mario Kassar to sell the rights for $5 million, since the Hemdahl Corporation was going through a bit of financial trouble at the time. So now with all the legal troubles over with and visual effects being where James Cameron wanted them to be, it was full steam ahead on a Terminator sequel, and so he cast Robert Patrick as a T-1000 because he felt like it was a perfect contrast between, Mr. Big hulking Arnold Schwarzenegger, even though he's more powerful than the T-800 itself, which he thought would be such a nice contrast between the two of them. The film had a budget of $102 million, making it the most expensive movie of all time. For the time. It went on to gross $519.8 million worldwide, making it the most successful movie of 1991. It then went on to win 4 Academy Awards for makeup, sound editing, and VFX. Alright, well, I think that's enough backstory for now. Let's get into the movie itself. So everything from Terminator 1 is elevated in Terminator 2, everything from the action to the VFX to even the Terminator theme itself. And this time around, Arnold is rocking the whole leather ensemble from the beginning, no more of this 80s punk crap. And there's something about his performance in this movie that feels just a little more robotic than the first movie, almost like Skynet took the T-800 model and just slightly tweaked it a little bit. But definitely the biggest thing about the T-800 in this movie is that this time, spoilers, is that this time around that he is not the villain, he's actually the good Terminator in this movie, which was a twist that many people did not see coming, myself included. When I first saw Terminator 2 back over a decade ago, I definitely did not expect that. I figured, okay, Arnold's sent back in time, he's gonna be the bad Terminator again, he gets the motorcycle and the glasses and all that, and you assume that right up until the scene in the mall where both Terminators corner John Connor in the hallway, and then Arnold pulls out the shotgun like, oh crap, here we go. But then all expectations go out the window when Arnold says,
"Get down."
And Robert Patrick is great as the T-1000 in this movie, and what I really appreciate about Robert Patrick's performance is that he's not just trying to copy Arnold's performance, he brings a different level of intensity to this T-1000 character. He's got more of the mannerisms of a police officer, formal, but still, kind of charming in some areas. He feels just a little more human than Schwarzenegger in this movie. And also, if you see this guy when he's running down the hallway and stuff, with this bloody intensity in his eyes, it's like, yeah, if I saw that coming after me, even if I didn't realize his arms could turn into daggers and crap, I would still be terrified of that. It also doesn't help that he can shapeshift into anybody he comes into contact with, so yeah, you would really have to be watching your back if the T-1000 was coming after you. And not to mention the CGI on the T-1000 is still fantastic and holds up very well to this day. This is again a prime example of how CGI was used early on in major movies like this, and then this technology would be taken even further a year or two later with the release of Jurassic Park. But there's also a great blend of practical effects throughout the movie as well, including bigger explosions, a significantly better looking prosthetic Arnold head, and they even used twins a few times in the movie as well, like in the hospital when the T-1000 takes the form of the security guard. Those are two twin brothers in that movie, and they even use Linda Hamilton's twin sister a couple times as well. And if you didn't know Linda Hamilton had a twin, you do now. And speaking of Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor is back in this movie, and she has done a complete 180 since the last time we saw her, and this brings me back to my Laurie Strode comparison, where in the first movie, she was kind of just the innocent victim throughout it. You know, she wasn't prepared, she wasn't armed, she couldn't do much, but then in the sequel, which I'm talking about Laurie Strode from the 2018 Halloween sequel, not the other Halloween 2 that came out 2 years after the first Halloween movie, you know, she's a character that was scarred by the events of the first movie, but this time, she's prepared, she's armed to the teeth, and she's also just a complete badass this time around, and that applies perfectly to Sarah Connor in Terminator 2. You know, she's not the same character anymore because she has been plagued with the knowledge that Judgment Day is coming in a few years, and nobody believes her, of course, and you know, that kind of knowledge would be enough to mess up a person big time, and Linda Hamilton just captures that so well within her performance and brings some serious heft to certain scenes that are focused on her specifically, and I think the peak of her performance comes from the scene where she goes to Miles Dyson's house to try to kill him because she blames him for the creation of the Terminators, which kinda makes sense, but also Miles Dyson has just been studying the leftover Terminator parts from the first movie. So is it really his fault, or is this an example of just science going too far? It's a bit of a gray area, but still, Linda Hamilton gives a great performance in that particular scene especially. Edward Furlong does a good job as the young John Connor. You know, he does a good job of playing this rebellious kid who's in a lot of foster homes, gets into a lot of trouble. You know, he thinks his mother is completely crazy because she thinks the world's going to end in a few years, which it is. You know, there are some moments where his acting ability is just a little off, but you know, I think that's to be expected because I believe this was his very first movie. James Cameron essentially picked the kid off the street and put him in this movie, and you know, there are some moments where you can tell he was kind of going through puberty a bit because you can hear his voice crack a couple times, but for the most part, I think he does a good job here. And his chemistry with Schwarzenegger in this movie is absolutely fantastic. You know, he starts out as just this kid that basically got the coolest toy ever with a personal Terminator, but then he slowly begins to care for the T-800 like it's another human being or even somewhat of a father figure, which makes Arnold's sacrifice at the end of the movie just that much more powerful and emotional. I would say this movie is much more of an action movie than the first one. The first Terminator, I consider that to be more of like a sci-fi thriller horror type thing, but this movie is very much an action movie. Every sequence in this movie is fantastic, super memorable, and they just escalate themselves with every single one. You know, whether you're talking about the truck chase in the reservoir, or the part where they go and blow up the Cyberdyne building, or the chase in the steel mill at the end of the film. Not to mention, the steel mill scene also gives us one of the absolute greatest action one-liners in movie history.
Hasta la vista, baby.
But the biggest takeaway about this movie is the message that the future isn't truly written yet. You know, just because some terrible things are supposed to happen in the future doesn't mean they need to happen, and the idea behind the ending is that John and Sarah stop Judgment Day by getting rid of all the evidence of Terminators and things like that so they can have a peaceful and non-post-apocalyptic world in the future, which leads to a very simplistic ending of a POV shot of a car driving down the road with Linda Hamilton giving some final voiceover. which is a very simple and effective ending, which is some of the best kinds of endings. And in fact, the original ending for this movie took place in the future with Linda Hamilton in the park, covered in age makeup, with the older John Connor playing with his daughter in the playground, which this is not the ending that they went with because test audiences did not take to it very well, mostly because it just looked like Sarah Connor in wrinkly age makeup and it just didn't work. But it's also a fine example of why you don't need to go over the top for your endings, because sometimes the simple driving shot with little voiceover is all you need. So all in all, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is one of the best action movies of all time, and it's just a damn great movie, period, and it's one of those fine examples of how a sequel can truly be better than the original, because it takes what was good about the first, elevated it, took some of the issues of the first movie and improved upon it, and just gave us a solid movie with a great story and a nice definitive ending that the future's not written yet. Judgment Day is not going to happen. This is where the franchise is going to stop. It's going to live on perfectly in the hearts of many people who grew up with these movies, whether it was in the 90s or in the 2000s like I did, and this is just a fine conclusion to a great series of 2 movies. There are no more sequels. Judgment Day is over with. The Terminators are not going to come back to kill John Connor again because they don't exist anymore. So, those are my thoughts on Terminator 2. If you guys enjoyed this review, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We're nearly to 200 subs. But anyway, if you guys have seen Terminator 2, which you really should have by now, then tell that down below, and we'll see you on the Brockopp side.